Hi, I'm Susan Papanicholas from How Does Your Garden Grow in Seattle, Washington. It's the middle of October and I'm here today in the beautiful Washington Park Arboretum next to this especially large and glorious sword fern to tell you about why I love using sword ferns in my clients' gardens. Sword fern is also known as Polystichum munitum. It's a fern that's native to the Pacific Northwest, and you'll find it all over the Pacific Northwest. It grows really well in our lowland forest understories. It's a really important part of that ecosystem, and it's very well adapted to grow in the Pacific Northwest. But not only does it grow in our forests, it also grows in our parks, as you see here at the Washington Park Arboretum. It also grows really well in our gardens in lots of different conditions. Sometimes native plants don't adapt that well to urban conditions or garden conditions, but sword fern is a plant that has done a really good job of growing in all the places it can grow in your garden where you're dealing with a lot of shade from big trees or a lot of root competition from big trees. I really rely on it for that very tough growing condition. It also grows really well in rockeries that are in more full sun with well-draining soil, and I even see it coming up in cracks in the sidewalks. This is one tough plant that can grow in lots of different places and be a workhorse in the garden for places where it might be hard to get something else to thrive. Also, I find sword ferns to be very beautiful. They're an evergreen fern. They grow up and have this very symmetrical circular shape with these fronds reaching out. They have a very soft appearance. So they add this element of soft green to the garden, this beautiful texture, and it's green throughout the year. So I can really rely on it to bring some life into the garden in the winter. One of the things I really like to do when I'm growing sword ferns in people's gardens is make sure that they get cut back to the ground every year in late February. This is super important with this plant for a bunch of reasons. One reason is that sometimes when I recommend this plant to my clients, they balk a little bit. They're not sure like this is the plant for them because they've seen it growing where it doesn't get cut back, and in those situations you have a lot of brown foliage mixed with green foliage. The old foliage builds up in the base of this plant and it looks really messy and unsightly and kind of takes away from sort of the more symmetrical round shape of the plant. So you can solve that problem by cutting this to the ground every February, and you're getting all the previous year's growth out. So everything you're going to see that growing season is just the new growth from that year. The other thing that accomplishes is a gorgeous spring show when the fronds unfurl. So next year's fronds are all tightly wound up into like brown little nubbins that are sort of clustered at the base of the fern. You'll see them when you go in there in late February to cut them back. And you'll cut off the old fronds and compost those, and you're left behind with all this year's fronds very tightly wound up at the base of the plant. As they unfurl, they grow in the shape of a fiddlehead, so you sort of have this coil of the fern frond that expands open as it starts growing in the spring, and it is so beautiful to watch. It's one of my favorite things about spring is watching the ferns unfurl. And this very ordinary sword fern has one of the most spectacular unfurlings in the spring. It's really, really beautiful. And you can't really see that happening if you haven't cut the old foliage away. But by removing that old foliage, it really helps that part of the growth cycle shine. So this is a plant I love to use in my clients' gardens in a lot of tough conditions, especially in the understory of trees. It can be really, really helpful where you're dealing with root competition and shade, because that's how it likes to grow in the forest. It brings an evergreen, stately structure to the garden. It gives us color and texture. It's easy to grow, and it's very well adapted to our climate. It's a very valuable plant for gardening here in Seattle, and I really love using it. I feel like a sword fern evangelist, and I'm here to tell you it is a great plant to add to your garden.